The securities market has a high concentration of high-value assets, and this makes it an attractive target for cyber criminals.
Well, the International Securities Services Association, otherwise known as ISA, has a working group looking into the threat of cybercrime to the industry. And here to report on its findings are Bill Hodash, who's the Managing Director at DTCC, and Andy Smith. Andy is the Chief Risk Officer at BNY Mellon. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us here on Sibos Television. Bill, if I can start with you. We know the securities market is extremely complicated and it has numerous entry points. So does that make it more or less easy for cyber criminals to actually penetrate it?
Well, in some ways, the complexity can make it more difficult. For example, in our core business activity, we deliver securities versus the return of cash. So that itself is a complex undertaking that takes a number of days to complete with a lot of parties involved in that. And it's kind of a closed system. The assets don't leave. So it's not like a payment instruction where you ask a counterparty to deliver cash out of the system. You're actually delivering within a closed system. So that complexity sometimes can make it less likely, but in my view, those who subscribe to that may be getting a false sense of confidence that we won't be attacked. So in my view, that false sense of confidence can actually cause an attack that happens to maybe be more successful.
Andy, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, what I would add is that the securities market, it moves trillions and trillions of dollars every day, and a lot of that cash flow is published. There are maturity times, there are dividend deadlines and schedules pre-notified. So I think from that perspective, as Bill says, it does add to the susceptibility.
Bill, the market obviously relies heavily on centralised critical functions. What impact does that have on the type of cyber threats that it faces?
Well, that's an interesting characteristic of our industry. I actually work for one of those centralized functions, a systemically important financial market utility, and all of the intermediaries in the marketplace depend on services from them. So for a type of cyber criminal who's most interested in causing the most disruption possible in the capital markets, we and other market infrastructures are interesting targets. So as a result of that, we have to be the most resilient in our risk management and our potential recovery from an attack because we're so connected to the other players in the marketplace. And in fact, regulation is forcing that. So whether we were doing it because we're getting ahead of the game or not, the regulation is forcing that to happen across the world.
And Andy, when attacks do take place, how does that market complexity actually impact on detection and resolution rates?
Well, I think because the securities market has a lot of links to its chain. There's a lot of different vendors. There's a lot of different players and participants within the market. So I think because you've got such a large chain, you're only ever going to be as strong as that weakest link in the chain. So I think that because of those different links, I think that that could theoretically lead to some delays in detecting whether there's been an attack. Particularly if one part of the chain is looking to investigate whether something truly is a cyber attack or not, and that's taking some time, and they have to go through the legal process to review it and then pass it up the chain for notification. So I think from a detection perspective, it could theoretically take longer. Then I think from a resolution point of view, you've got similar sort of problems. The parts of some participants within the securities chain won't necessarily have and won't have full control over other participants. So their ability to actually put people in to make sure the right thing is happening is limited and can be contractually limited. So I think there definitely are real challenges there.
It definitely sounds like it. Andy, how have the attacks in the securities market evolved? How have you seen them evolve over the last 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think we've clearly seen in payments the evolution of the cyber attacks. But I think certainly this year, a good example would be this year we actually saw, as a result of the payment-related attack, as the cyber criminals proceeded with their attack, they actually disrupted and damaged the systems of a particular bank. Now that bank was also a securities participant themselves. So what we found there was that because of the actions of that particular payment-directed attack, it really disrupted the securities industry in a particular country. So I think that's an example of how it's evolved recently. Our paper looks to other scenarios, if you like, that haven't happened yet, but we do think that there are particular vulnerabilities. So we're trying to get out with the ISA work before these things actually happened. And then I think taking it even further, even looking sort of bigger picture, if you consider that custodians, for example, and I work for a custodian company, we look after the assets of pension funds, and if you could foresee a cyber attack which disrupted the securities chain for a pension fund, you get to a position where if the money can't get to the pension fund, then that money can't get to the pensioners, and that has a big disrupting effect. I think that's a big picture. We haven't seen it, but that certainly for me would be a concern. It hasn't evolved that far, but we've got to think along those lines.
Yep.
And look, let's just look at it in terms of the response as well to the threat of cybercrime. If I can put that question to you, Andy, and then get Bill's response as well. But how should the industry respond?
Well, clearly the industry has got to put cyber security, cyber mitigation as a top priority. Absolute top priority, and will need to allocate the right resources, financial resources, and specialist resources to addressing the problem. I think that the community needs to up the ante when it comes to awareness, and awareness needs to be right from the top right down to the bottom. A cyber attack can happen at ground level, that's for sure. So I think the community absolutely does look to promote awareness, but I think we need to turn awareness into BAU. The threat of a cyber attack, it should be one of the first things we talk about every single day with every person within our company. So I think making that part of BAU is absolutely important. Some specific things. I think that, and Bill and I have kind of discussed this before. I think things like simulation testing in the industry, actually, practicing. Having what a cyber attack would look like from an instant perspective and how you respond to that. I think, well, what I would say though, I think the industry is taking steps. I think the work that Swift have done with their customer security program is excellent. Just being here this week, there are any number of sessions going through the cyber risk to the community. So I think the industry is upping the ante on the awareness, but that is continuous, and it has to become BAU, in my view.
You're nodding in agreement with that, though.
Oh, absolutely. The awareness issue is less of a challenge now because of what we've seen in payments. In fact, the session that we're running today talks about the fact that, hey, hold on a moment, I thought cyber risk was only a factor for payments, not for securities. Well, that's not the case. If you ask the CEOs of major financial institutions that have both payment infrastructure and securities infrastructure, what keeps them up at night, you will invariably hear the risk of a cyber attack. That was not the case a couple of years ago. So it's in the C-suite. It's not just the technologists, it's not just the operations people, but CEOs across the world are really very concerned about this. There could be attacks on water systems, on electrical grids, and the next one right behind that is financial market infrastructure, the flow of funds.
The ambitiousness of these attacks.
Absolutely. We have to take it as seriously as a utility operator of essential services for individuals. We are definitely a target. So the last thing I would say that nobody has an unlimited budget in any company, but the Chief Information Security Officer comes pretty close these days.
Right. Bill, if we follow that line of thought a little bit further, what can securities learn from the experiences of other industries?
Well, in fact, the ISA paper talks a little bit about that. So the objectives of the paper are threefold: to raise awareness that this could happen to us, and basically a wake-up call to those who haven't heard it yet. The second is that, wait a minute, we don't have to reinvent wheels. As you said, we can study other industries. There are frameworks that have been developed that are not industry specific. They are global, and there are domestic frameworks as well. So we can learn from other industries in their applications of those frameworks, what enhancements and customizations they made, and the lessons learned. And Andy mentioned one of them. I mean, securities is an adjacent industry to payments. What happened in payments, and Swift has shared details with the ISA working group about that, it really helps us in thinking about solutions to the problems. Not so narrow solutions, but broader solutions that we borrow from other industries. One example is that the Swift Customer Security Program gets into assessments that are transparent. So each customer can share an assessment, an attestation, as to the maturity of their cyber capabilities. Then market forces take hold, and customers decide who to do business with based on their own risk profile. So that transparency, that information sharing, is critical, because market pressure will make everybody up their game and up their capabilities in cyber risk if they want to continue doing business with everybody else.
Andy, how important is collaboration within the securities industry and with the larger banking community in strengthening cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's absolutely vital. And I think, and of course, that's part of the work that ISA have been doing. ISA is a group of custodians, of CSDs, and utilities as well. And as a group, we have been collaborating on this paper. I think, and of course, you need to do more of that. And I think we need to do it on a very timely basis as well. I think the paper will be great, but what I would like to see is that as an industry, the securities industry has its own network of teams that are monitoring for red flags and sharing those really quickly with all participants within our securities chains. I think that's important. I would like to see, as I said before, simulation testing. Actually, all of us get together, collaborate on simulation tests to see how it actually would work, and what wouldn't work, and what we need to learn from that. So, collaboration, absolutely vital.
It is a very good point. Bill, finally, what is the one thing that the securities industry should do to protect itself now?
Well, I'm going to get a little greedy and give you two things. One kind of short term and one long term. We've issued a significant paper here, but it calls for implementing one of the frameworks or more of the frameworks and best practices. So we think the first thing a firm could do is to simply measure their own capabilities versus those frameworks and those best practices, so they know where they stand today. The second thing, and they have to do it short term, is plan for what's going to happen when it happens to them. Okay, we had a chief information security officer of one of the major banks address us recently, and he put it this way, that one of us is going to have a bad day soon. It's going to happen, no matter how our defenses are. How are we going to recover from that? You have to have a playbook that everybody understands, all aspects of recovery from a cyber attack, and that can mature over time, but there's no excuse for not being prepared for that attack.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, heard it here first. Andy Smith and Bill Hodash. We'll leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us on Sibos TV. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.